Okay, we're live.
Cool. And are we letting people in the room?
Yep.
Excellent. Welcome, folks, as you roll in. So happy to have you. And Emerald, can you bring Mehrdad in as a panelist?
Yes, let me take a look.
And Olivia. Hi, Mehrdad. Welcome those who are coming in. Folks are authenticating and joining. We will have a live broadcast going. So this will be, we are starting that soon. Welcome, welcome. We will let folks join for a few more minutes and find their translation. We have live translators who will be available in the interpretation button within the webinar. Please, if you need language support, it's in there. It's in Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, French, and Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, French, and Chinese. So please join if you need that. Hello. Welcome. I will make my screen larger. This is just a preview for the translation if you need it. There is a YouTube live stream happening at the Wikimedia Foundation. YouTube account. If you have someone who you want to share this with, feel free to do so. But it will not have live translation. The YouTube live stream can be found at this, that link. Cool. Welcome, welcome. If you need translation, it's in the bottom right of the panel. And if you need subtitles, there is some subtitle support in Zoom. It is not always perfect. So if you need it, it is there. And there's also live transcripting, I believe. Excellent. And we have our final panelist. She able to authenticate. Just a reminder to everyone in the room, there is a chat and there's space to ask questions and answers at the bottom of the Zoom. All interactions in Wikimedia events are covered by our friendly space policy, and I'm going to read it aloud. So the friendly space policy, we are dedicated to providing a harassment-free space and experience for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, disability, physical appearance, age, race, ethnicity, political affiliation, national origin, or religion, and it's not limited to these aspects. We do not tolerate any form of harassment of participants. Any participants violating these rules may be sanctioned or expelled from the event. And our team is paying attention to the chat and Q&A, so please make sure that you follow this. So welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Alex Stenson. I'm going to be hosting this panel. I am from the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm a senior program strategist at the foundation, and I'm one of the organizers for the Wiki for Human Rights campaign. Our theme is Right to a Healthy Environment, and we're going to explain a bit more why. But what to expect today, I'm going to be giving a brief introduction, and I will be asking our collaborators at UN Environmental Program and UN Human Rights to kind of draw the connection with our campaign. And then we have a wonderful panel discussion of experts on the intersection of environmental issues and the human rights. And we will have room for Q&A. So if you have questions, please add those questions to the Q&A channel. And my colleague Mehrdad will be helping me filter and choose some of those for the panelists. We will be doing a short break at the short video break where we will be providing support or space for the interpreters to breathe for a moment. Live interpreting a long session like this can be exhausting, and we want to acknowledge and support and very much appreciate all that work. And then we have a brief message from our director and executive director and CEO, Mariana Eskinder, and then a message from Ruby, who's our wonderful organizing fellow this year, who is helping us organize the campaign. So I'm very excited to have you all here today, and this is what we are doing. I get a lot of questions from the Wikimedia community and from elsewhere, like why Wiki for Human Rights? So I wanted to give you a brief introduction to that why. What exactly has kind of created the conditions for this? And at the very heart of it is Wikimedia is a very powerful platform for communicating both human rights and environmental crises. And we know that there are billions of interactions with our content every year that relate to something that's fundamentally for all of us. That we all have a right to a healthy environment, as has been affirmed by the UN Council of Human Rights. And so this is really important. This is for everyone. This is about everyone. And so when we first started our partnership with the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we realized we all have that opportunity. We can use platforms like Wikipedia to share knowledge about the environmental crises and how it affects each and every one of us as humans. And so that's what we're focused on. We've also had contributions from UNICEF and UN Environmental Program on both our list and our speakers here today. So I want to do a special shout out and thank you to that. And I wanted to invite Ben Schachter and Olivia Boner from our partnership to give a few just brief thoughts on why this matters.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. I won't take long. On behalf of my name is Ben Schachter. I coordinate the work of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on the right to a healthy environment and climate change. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone here and say a few words about this important partnership with the Wikimedia Foundation and the Wiki for Rights Earth Day campaign, which is kicking off right now with this webinar. Access to information is a human right. It's the basis of sound evidence-based decision-making, like that called for by the Paris Agreement under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is the basis of informed participation, and the right to participation is the foundation of our societies and our democracies. It cannot be exercised effectively and meaningfully without information. You all have to know your rights to exercise your rights. Simply put, information and access to it is important for the effective enjoyment of all human rights, including the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. That's why OHCHR is so excited to be working to make more information about human rights and the environment available to people in all languages in collaboration with the Wikimedia Foundation. You can help us make the information people need to understand and exercise their rights available and accessible to all people. You can help us advance the human right to a healthy environment. So thank you so much for joining us. We have an amazing expert panel ahead. You'll be hearing from other partners in this work, and including UNICEF, UNEP, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Special Rapporteur on Toxics, and many others. And we look forward to hearing from them and working with you. Again, many thanks to the audience and to our panel. Over.
Yeah, and I'd like to invite Olivia also to share her experience.
Thanks, Alex. And hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Bonner. I am an associate legal officer at UNEP in the International Environmental Law Unit. And I'm very, very excited to be supporting this campaign for the second year in a row. And it's incredibly timely, and UNEP is very, very happy to be supporting this campaign again. As we've mentioned, the right to a healthy environment was recognized at the Human Rights Council last October, and the movement continues to surge and the momentum continues to build to hopefully have it recognized at the General Assembly. So I'm very, very excited to be part of this panel and listen to our incredible speakers and all of the knowledge they have to share so that we can continue building access to this knowledge, as Ben mentioned, is so critical for protecting human rights and the right to a healthy environment, especially. I also had the pleasure of participating in a Wikimedia community event here in Kenya, in Nairobi, and it was really incredible and empowering to be in a group of such excited and such dedicated Wikimedian editors and youth, especially, really taking up the call to increase knowledge on the right to a healthy environment and to really understand how it impacts all of our lives, our communities, and every part of our survivability on this planet. So for People and Planet, I am very, very excited to be supporting this event again. And I thank you everyone for joining. I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I really want to emphasize why this matters. Billions of people interact with our content on Wikipedia. And we are making decisions now as the IPCC and other kind of intergovernmental bodies and scientists around the world have been reminding us. We are making decisions now as a collective, as humanity, about future generations. And these decisions are happening in contexts all over the world where access to knowledge, access to environmental knowledge, access to human rights knowledge may not be easy. And it may not be easy in your own language and in your own context. The world is increasingly very complicated, and it's really important to understand how we respond as humans, how we think about ourselves as humans, and how we kind of connect that story to the rest. With all of that kind of context introduction, I want to introduce our panel. We have Elizabeth Mrema, who is with the Convention on Biodiversity and an Assistant Secretary of the UN, and we are very, very flattered to have your presence. Dr. Marcos O. Arena, who is the Special Rapporteur of Human Rights and Toxics. Tina Rai, who is a active organizer and human rights expert on the intersection of women's rights and these issues, and youth activist Alejandro Dali, who's an advocate for pollution. And so I'm going to start our panel by asking each panelist to do a brief introduction on what they kind of think is important for us to know about themselves, about their work, and this connection between human rights and environmental action. So Elizabeth, I'd like to introduce you to start.
Thank you very much, first to all of you for organizing this event, Wikimedia Foundation, UNEP, Office of High Commission for Human Rights. Good to see you, Benjamin. And for all of us that we are here together to consider these opportunities to address human rights, for me, in the context of biodiversity action. The Convention on Biological Diversity, as you may know, is the first global agreement that covers all aspects of biodiversity, from conservation of biodiversity, the sustainable use of its components, and fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the use of the genetic resources. And the Secretariat of the Convention was established to support these goals under the Convention by assisting the member states or parties, as well as other stakeholders in the implementation of the various programs of work, all of which have human rights context within them. So the Secretariat really welcomes the historic recognition of the human rights to clean, health, and sustainable environment by the Human Rights Council last year in October. It was a long journey, but delighted, finally, we are there with that global recognition, in addition to ongoing efforts calling on the UN General Assembly to also recognize this right. We know that biodiversity is essential to ensure the ecosystem services fundamental for human rights, such as access to clean air, access to safe water, access to nutritious food, medical resources, cultural services, and the list goes on. You may know currently under the Convention on Biological Diversity, member states are in the process of developing a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And in the draft framework, already the recognition of the right to a healthy environment comes in at a timely moment. And actually the goals and targets of the framework will provide and support then the realization of this right as the framework is being implemented. The new post-2020 global biodiversity framework will be a global consensus strategy, which will include goals and targets, actionable targets or actions that will address our triple planetary crises and support the realization of the right to healthy environment. So this event is coming at a timely manner after the recognition of this right to clean, health, sustainable environment. And now I think our focus should be how can that right be exercised in practice within our societies? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opening thought. And Dr. Arena, can you explain a bit about how this biodiversity and pollution, there are two different crises, right? Can you explain your work in that context?
Okay, we know that
Oh.
issue.
I don't want to interrupt you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. I wanted to introduce Dr. Marie Arena.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks to the organizers of this program. I'm delighted to join this panel of such distinguished speakers. In addressing your questions, I thought I'd tell the story of the Esejas or Esejas. This is an indigenous community that lives in the river Beni in Bolivia, which, as we know, is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. A couple of months ago, they engaged in a program of sampling their hair to see whether it could be contaminated with mercury. They were concerned about this given some symptoms that they were experiencing in their community. As we know, mercury is an extremely dangerous metal. The exposure to mercury to pregnant women can be passed on to the fetus. Exposure to mercury in children has severe neurological impairment, kidney damage, cardiovascular. And you may also be acquainted with the Minamata disease that has been named after the very tragic experience in the Minamata Bay in Japan, the Chiso Chemical Corporation dumping chemicals and mercury in the bay, the community exposed to contaminated seafood, the impacts on ataxia, paralysis, coma, death, very unfortunate. In response of all that, the Minamata Convention on Mercury was negotiated at the international level, and this shows how dangerous mercury is. And in the face of that, the Esejas, they live their way as they have lived over the centuries. They depend on their plants and medicines, on their fish for food, on the river for water. So they ask, where is this mercury coming from? They found mercury in their hair at the end of the day. It's no mystery. The mercury was coming and is coming from small-scale mining conducted upriver. The use of mercury to separate the gold from the ore is rampant in many places, and this is despite the inefficiency of the method compared with existing alternatives that do not use mercury. So why is it used? Well, it's easy. It's easy to access. It's relatively cheap compared to the price of gold, but it contaminates the waters and the fish upon which people rely for sustenance and well-being. The environmental injustice here is ostensible. An indigenous community that lives their life according to their traditions is now being impacted in their fundamental rights by the small-scale mining. But it's not just the impact on humans. There's massive deforestation, the concomitant loss of biodiversity, and also mercury is persistent. It doesn't just go away. It doesn't degrade or dissolve. It has impacts on the wildlife that live on the forests. Now, this problem that the Esejas are facing in Bolivia and Bolivia itself, unfortunately, is not an isolated case. There's rampant illegal mining in the Amazon basin that's contaminating forests and biodiversity with mercury. There's a new El Dorado gold rush in West Africa. Southeast Asia is not immune to the problem. Small-scale mining that uses mercury has become the largest source of emissions of mercury in the world to the air and to the waters. So confronting the problem, that's where human rights issues come in. International cooperation has managed to channel the Minamata Convention on Mercury, but there are shortcomings in implementation, and there are also gaps in the design of Minamata. A rights-based approach with its emphasis on information, participation, and transparency is key to closing those shortcomings and gaps. The rights to life, health, and a healthy environment, water, food, and for indigenous peoples, culture and self-determination, they provide a normative framework in order to challenge and change the practices that are enabled by existing norms and policies. In all of this, the right of information is critical. It is the gateway to mobilization. If you look at the case of the ESEJAS again, without information, the community would be paralyzed. It would be very limited, or it would be even powerless to mobilize. So all of this says is that human rights and the environment, they are not separate spheres of our human existence and our relationship with biodiversity. They are integrated in the actual realities that indigenous peoples, other communities, all of us, how we live every day. I will stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, this is a great introduction to your work, Dr. Arena, and I think we'll have more questions about that as we get deeper. Tina, would you like to kind of introduce how your kind of work and approach kind of makes that connection between the environment and human rights?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Alex, and everybody. It's also wonderful to be here and see some familiar faces, and also a very interesting and timely, I would say, a webinar, and also some great speakers who have already spoken before me, of course, Ms. Merima and Dr. Marcos. My name is Mrinala Rai, and I'm the Director for Women for Biodiversity. And a lot of our work for us has been looking at the intersections of women's rights, gender equality in the context of the environment, in particularly engaging with the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, where we also convene the Women's Caucus. So I will be sharing my perspectives more on, I think reflecting also on what Dr. Marcos talked about, is on why the importance of addressing a rights-based approach, also in particular to the rights of women. Gender equality is an issue of both human dignity and respect at greater global prosperity. Right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment will not be achievable if half of the world's population is not as involved. Looking at the World Health Organization's definition on health, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This is also very important because when we're talking about why the right to a healthy environment, we also look at the impacts of the biodiversity loss or pollution or disasters has on the disappropriate impact on women and girls. You know, you're talking about gender-based violence linked with the environment. In very brief, I'm putting everything very short. You're talking about toxins, you're talking about environmental human rights defenders, and you're talking about sexual and reproductive health rights. So the impact of the environmental harm definitely has extra burden on women.
Hi,
the coronavirus.
Tina, could you slow down just a little bit for the translators? Thank you.
Okay, all right, sorry. Yeah, I will be slow. So the coronavirus pandemic has also wreaked havoc on global economies. For women, the impact has been devastating. Gender equality has not just stalled, but actually regressed in many Asian countries. The extent to which women can exercise public participation and realize their right to a healthy environment and other related rights will heavily depend on how public participation is interpreted and applied. This is also, I think, in the context of what we are discussing here on the recent, a couple of months back, the Human Rights Council's resolution, but also understanding that they are also very relevant and connected with other work, which is the Aarhus Convention and the Escazú Agreement, which also talks about access to information and participation. coming from the context of biodiversity, and Alex, I think I did go through your previous webinars that you hosted. And one thing that kind of came to my reflection where the webpage talked about that that the global community has not yet found ways to integrate human rights into all international processes for addressing environmental crisis. For example, the most recent UN Climate Change Summit in Glasgow did not include significant protection of human rights. I think this is really very important. And I think what we are really doing here is very crucial, because though we really talk about human rights, there's a growing importance of how it is linked with biodiversity loss or climate or disaster. But what's really missing are concrete actions that need to be taken in place to actually mobilize this ambition. And I think looking at from the context of the UNCBD, I think it's a very crucial moment. If all the colleagues who are also attending here, everybody is more familiar with the Paris Agreement, with the climate COP. I always tell people, like, the Rio had three triplets. The most popular one is the climate. Everybody knows about it. You ask people why the weather is very hot, everybody links it to climate, but nobody really links it up with, well, maybe the climate is changing or the pollution is increasing. Also because there is a loss of biodiversity in some other part of the world. I think that narrative, I really hope that that narrative also changes to also amplifying the need why the environmental crisis is happening. It's not one over the other, but rather how they all are linked with each other. So the time to act is now to address the drivers of biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. The opportunity to ensure that the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, is anchored in human rights to ensure the right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for all, in particular for the people in vulnerable situations and the rights holders. Biodiversity holds the key to addressing other environmental challenges, including but not limited to climate, disaster, pollution. To make peace with nature and live in harmony with nature, we need to be informed, stay informed, and kept informed. And to fully engage meaningfully and effectively, information needs to be communicated. So I think I will leave it there, and I'll be happy to take on any further questions. Sorry for talking very fast. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much. I think the more I've dug into these environmental crises as they intersect, the more I'm understanding how other human rights show up. And I think the gender perspective is really powerful. And it's a really powerful communication tool for our communities. I'm wondering, Alejandro, can you describe a little bit about how the human rights perspective helps your work as a youth activist?
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all the organizers and my fellow panelists, which I admire all of you. So that's amazing. I love these opportunities. My name is Alejandro, and I'm a young climate activist from Venezuela, currently living in Bogota, Colombia. Actually, trying to understand how these two topics related, I realized that, to me, the worst effect of the climate crisis are its effects on our health and well-being. And I believe that the climate crisis is also a public health crisis. And I think that's a change in the narrative that we need to advocate for, especially in particular in international spaces such as COP and other environmental spaces. Understand that the health sector needs to work hand in hand with the climate sector in order to attend the effects of the climate crisis. And there is a particular issue that worries me a lot, that is air pollution. Right now, air pollution is one of the worst public health crises in the world. We're talking that about 1.8 billion people under the age of 15 breathe air that is so polluted that it risks their health and development. And just in Colombia, where I currently live, every 50 minutes, a person dies of diseases related to air pollution. And air pollution affects everyone. Air pollution affects from unborn child to pregnant women to older people, and it just risks our development through all our life. And I believe not many people are talking about it. We see air pollution as a crisis that is not related to the climate crisis when it is. And I think that's one of the key aspects to highlight when we're talking about sharing information and the work that Wikimedia does, is understanding that many people don't talk about air pollution because the information is just not there. In Venezuela, for example, there are no monitors around air pollution. And in Colombia, 50 cities that have more than 1,500 people that should have monitors to measure air pollution are not currently there. So the law says that we should measure, we're not currently measured. And that's where my work comes in. I'm a young climate activist and founder of the National Citizen Network for Clean Air in Colombia. And soon, because we're expanding, the first Latin American citizen network for air pollution. So what we do is working hand in hand with young climate activists through all the country, currently in Colombia, also in Ecuador and Peru, to measure air pollution with low-cost sensors that goes to a common database. So everyone can know what's the state of air pollution in their communities where there is currently no information available. This allows us to do more advocacy, to increase our demands to the local governments to understand that there are certain parts of the cities, for example, near schools or near parks, where children are the most affected by air pollution. And I wanted to connect this with what we're doing in UNICEF. I'm a UNICEF consultant leading the efforts of UNICEF to empower more young people in the world to mobilize for air pollution. And what we did was creating the first toolkit for young climate activists to mobilize for air pollution, which I'm going to leave in the chat right now. So you can check it, because it is so important for young people to feel that they have the chance and the abilities to mobilize for issues that affect us all. And the first thing for this to happen is to have the right information. And this particular space, I think, is a space where we can advocate to understand that we need more information regarding air pollution and more information regarding how the climate crisis is a human rights crisis and is a public health crisis. To begin with that, we need more data around where are the pollutants, who are the people that are getting sick because of them, and how can we, civil society and particularly young people, advocate to change it.
That's such a wonderful kind of connective tissue to the activism that the youth are doing. And I think really empowering youth to participate is really important. I want to apologize because our Spanish interpretation connection may not have broken while you were talking, Alejandro. And Emerald, if it's possible, Evelyn and the attendees is also able to translate, and we could bring her, Evelyn Heidel. So while we do that, lo siento, la traducción de español no tiene problemas en este momento, problemas con conexiones con Zoom. While we kind of rotate back, I'd like to ask Ms. Elizabeth Mrema to kind of reflect on, across these issues and with other kind of opportunities for working on biodiversity and these intersecting crises, where does access to information matter for the work of your organization, these international treaties?
Thank you very much again. Indeed, we cannot talk of human rights without ensuring that public knowledge, access to information to everybody, because information is power. And without it, then that exercise of that right cannot happen. For our purposes within the Convention on Biological Diversity, we take it that to be able to transform to achieve the transformative changes necessary to solve the ongoing global biodiversity crisis. Conservation and sustainable use actions must be underpinned by a robust, accurate, and independent information, basically looking at the whole of government and whole of society approach. So the convention has a dedicated scientific, technical, and technological advice subsidiary body, or SUBSTA, which actually provides those recommendations to the Conference of the Parties for its consideration and adoption. And the agenda items under this body, for instance, will include soil biodiversity, marine biodiversity, health and biodiversity, invasive alien species, to just mention few. And for the convention, of course, continues to work closely with the Intergovernmental Science Policy Panel or Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is an independent intergovernmental body, and its program of work aims at strengthening the science policy interface for biodiversity and ecosystem services for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, including long-term human well-being and sustainable development. And this is where that information from the scientific reports or information translates down to other stakeholders, hopefully, of course, being made in the simple language and in the languages understood by the different stakeholders. And all these aspects will have human rights connotation in them when it comes to implementation. So actually the future framework or global biodiversity framework aims to improve this communication between the scientists, the society, and the decision makers to be able to use science in policy and practice, and particularly when it comes to monitoring the implementation of the framework. Every day, science produces an ever more environment-related data. However, this information is often inaccessible either to developing countries or indigenous peoples and local communities and other stakeholders, because one could be inaccessibility of the information itself, but the information could also be accessible, but the language is not understood by, particularly when it comes to our local communities or by those stakeholders who are not scientists. So when we talk of information as a right, as a human right, we need to bear in mind that that information has to be in a manner and the language understood by different stakeholders. So this right need also to be targeted and translated in a way that it can be understood by different people in the society. The Global Biodiversity Framework also recognizes multiple ways of knowing, especially indigenous and local knowledge systems. Traditional knowledge, we know, is crucial to strengthen the transformative change we need to conserve biodiversity. And collaboration with the indigenous people and local communities developed by respecting safeguards to access that knowledge, and the local communities to access that knowledge first through a free, prior, informed consent. And under this principle, the framework will ensure that all information and knowledge can facilitate biodiversity management. It is also expected at our next conference of the parties later this year that it will initiate the process actually to develop a new program of work and an institutional arrangement for traditional knowledge. It is this new program of work that will play an important role in supporting the implementation of the framework, but more so the rights-based approach for the engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities and respect to their traditional cultural knowledge. And to put biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030 we will need a commitment from all stakeholders and wide uptake of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, access to public knowledge and information, particularly on the state of the planet and biodiversity loss, as well as possible transformation or transformative actions and solutions that can help us all to reverse the current trends will be critical. So we are looking at Week for Human Rights campaign as the right to a healthy environment is precisely the type of partnership and initiative that we need to keep all stakeholders informed and committed, and so can truly build that momentum for the adoption and uptake of a robust and ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is the time to be bold, and for bold leadership and collective efforts that can bring the transformative actions needed to put biodiversity on a path to recovery and ensure a healthy planet for the future generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'm wondering, I actually have a question I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. One of the things that I've noticed about biodiversity communication is that it's often very focused on like one species or one location or one part of the ecosystem. And I know working on traditional knowledge is like one way to help. But also I'm wondering, like, who are the smallest decision makers that you hope this global framework affects? Like, is it farmers? Is it local government policymakers? Like, what information do they need as the smallest decision maker? And like, what kind of story do you think is effective?
It's a good question. The negotiators are high-level government officials, but the implementers of the framework are the rest of the society below the line. These will be the farmers, the youth, the local communities, our children. These will be the actual implementers of the framework. It is this group of stakeholders where we would want appropriate targeted information to reach them so that then they can use that information in the implementation of the framework and exercise their right to know, to participate in the decision-making processes, and actually also to be engaged in the implementation itself on the ground.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful and bold in the message you're bringing us, and I truly appreciate it. I think Dr. Morena it wants to kind of expand and think a little bit further about how this access to information challenge kind of can both be helpful but also get in the way. So, Dr. Morena, how does this access to information conversation, what are you thinking about?
As I said, to me, first we have to ensure that everybody has access to information. That is one. But two, what kind of information is accessible? The scientists, yes, will need their scientific information, but the local communities, the children, will need the information in a way that they can understand. And that's why I underline the aspect of targeted information. Is it cartoon? Is it through Wikipedia website? Is it through researches? So that targeted information for a targeted group of stakeholders will be important for them to be able to exercise that right to information, right to participate in decision-making processes, and to ensure that that information is not with a price, but it is free and fair and equitable.
And Dr. Marcos, I think I want to bring you on, and yeah, like, how does this affect the pollution and toxics space?
Thanks, Alex. I want to elaborate on your question and pick up on a key point that Elizabeth has made, and which is the key role of science. Because in thinking about the audience with us today and the role of Wikimedia, we can talk about information, but we should also talk about disinformation. Disinformation has become a very profitable business. There are firms that specialize in spreading lies in society. There are social media companies that make money out of enabling the spread of those false information, the spread of disinformation. This has severe impacts on the climate emergency. So there are still so many people around the world that believe climate change is a hoax, and they are not familiar with climate science. Now, science has established as a fact that human anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases are having an impact on the global climate system. Now, to put that more plainly, that humans have caused a global climate emergency that threatens to render humans extinct from the planet. A similar situation is happening with toxics and wastes, where there are firms that specialize in the confusion in society about what is risk, about whether a substance is safe. They call for ever increasing amounts of information before we act. And this is a strategy to delay action. So as a result of disinformation, what we see is the misalignment between policy and science. Science tells us that there are risks associated with hazardous substances, but policy doesn't act on that. And that is leading to the toxification of our planet at the global level, and at the very local level. It is meaning that people and wildlife are exposed to hazardous substances that can impair all kinds of biological functions and produce illness. Now, how do we fight this? I would say that the right to science is one key tool to overcome the threats that humanity is facing from disinformation. Now, the right to science is often overlooked. It is a forgotten right, as it were. It's a distant relative that nobody talks to or nobody knows. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights of the United Nations, they articulate very clearly the right of everyone to benefit from scientific progress. And how do we benefit from the knowledge that scientists produce about the risks and harms of toxic substances? Well, we benefit by translating that knowledge into actual policies and protections. In order to do that process of translation, information is critical. Information is critical for the operation of platforms that take information and interface with policy. For example, in the biodiversity space, IPBES, and in the climate space, the IPCC are key. And I think it's quite encouraging that the last session of the UN Environment Assembly has decided finally to set up a global platform also on toxics, wastes and pollution. So information is key for those platforms to work. Information is also key for science to work. The scientific method depends on the ability of scientists to share their knowledge with one another, to conduct peer review. One final point I wish to make is that information is also key for citizens to become involved in the scientific project. Citizen science, under scientific protocols, the ability of citizens to collect data leads not only to a broader ability of scientific projects to reach the ground, but also for empowerment of communities that are able to see the information in action, and then to press for those scientific findings to be translated into policy. Thank you.
That's such a wonderful perspective. And I was actually on a panel earlier this week about disinformation, misinformation, and kind of how platforms like Wikipedia could make sure the most up-to-date information is there when someone needs to make a decision. And I think, you know, as a global community who works with many languages, like also taking it from, you know, the language that science is often done in because of colonial history, into the languages that people need is really powerful. And so I think that's kind of part of where our communities really thrive, is going from the English or like a dominant, more big dominant scientific language like French or Spanish into languages that other people can work in. I'm wondering, since I want to make sure that Tina and Alejandro have a chance to kind of weigh in on the access to information question. I'm wondering, Tina, like, is there a gender perspective on this, and like, how is it affecting your work?
Yeah, no, thanks, Alex. I think it's been really very insightful, even for me, to kind of listen to the other speakers and kind of reflect on few things, maybe not only from a gender perspective, which is always also challenging, but also as an overall. We're talking about information. I don't know whether this is a topic of discussion here, but sometimes building up on that information is not easy. There are these data gaps, knowledge gaps, to kind of validate somebody's work. I'll give you an example for maybe, you know, we're talking about Indigenous peoples and local communities, the traditional knowledge. Coming from the region that I am, where there are states, member states, who do not recognize Indigenous peoples, let alone their traditional knowledge, that sharing of information could also be challenging. I mean, I don't know, I'm just kind of speak as the discussions are going on, just kind of thinking aloud about it. Also, if we're talking about sharing of information, what are the safety nets or safeguards to ensure the safety of that knowledge, the intellectual property, right, you might call it, especially for traditional knowledge, but also accountability. I think where, I mean, if you know, I'm talking about Asia that I am, it's not easy. It's not easy being open about information. It's not easy about posting something on even a social media. You could definitely get scrutinized, especially if you are asserting some rights. So I think information could be very empowering, but also maybe time to think of how it could also defend the people who actually are saying something about it. I'm definitely, at least in my region, it's been personally also been very challenging to kind of present something in a much more critical way. So you're always trying to find a sort of a kind of middle path about either access to information or participation or even voicing certain things. For information, I think, and we're talking about right to a healthy environment, this is also really very important, where we're talking about women's rights. From that perspective, you're talking about information, how does it go there, where? It's usually also a larger part, at least again, I'm talking about Asia, a majority of the global South women, including from Indigenous peoples and local communities, rural women, farmers women, are uneducated. I mean, education is one of the biggest barriers. Forget about being on social media or getting access to the wiki links. So if you're having, for information to be actually reaching the rights holders, reaching that kind of, you're talking about that, you know, where does that change happen in the local, then the information definitely has to also take different forms where it can be accessible for people without, you know, this is where you call the inequality of digital inequalities, right? So I think that's the reality of the global community, the local communities, especially even from our work. timing is always a problem. A lot of these webinars, say, for example, are done in a timing, usually for me, it's late, always a late night. And mine is, my time zone is still okay. But by the time it goes to the Asia Pacific, say, for example, we always have a challenge of getting our community members from that, because I can't expect them to be being on webinars or, even having a discussion at like 2 a.m. in the morning. So these are very simple logistics, but over the 2 years that we've gone virtual, this has been our ground realities. The ground reality has been that not everybody has a data package that people would want to, can have the time. That's a luxury. You need resources. And so one of the key work that we're also looking at is saying that, when you're really talking about all these policies and actions, unless and until there is substantive substantive step taken to also ensure that there is financing and budgeting for women's organization, local initiatives, then again, policy again gets stuck at the national level. So those are some of the kind of gaps, and of course, also the accountability, lack of accountability of how or where it's implemented and for whom. So I'll leave it to that.
Yeah, our movement, being a global one, has had to learn a lot about like creating spaces that are more equitable, easier to access from different parts of the world, and easier to access from different timelines. I'm also reminded by your comments of that important pre-step to accessing the knowledge we have on platforms like Wikipedia, which is like understanding how to consume it, finding ways to actually having devices and data and all of these like things that kind of add up to barriers. It's just for the Wikimedians in the room, a reminder that like the thing we produce is not always the like thing people consume. There might be some things that need to be communicated or translated or accessed at a different way, in a different format. I want to give Alejandro a moment to respond to this question of access to information as well. I'm wondering, like, especially coming from the youth movement, I've made an observation that like a lot of the youth are very keenly aware of this like translation and information access problem. I'm wondering like how it's showing up in your kind of work.
Thanks, Alex, for the question. And I follow up with what Tina said. There is a big difference in access of information regarding where are you standing. And I believe a good approximation of this is COP, the COP events. I went to the pre-COP last year. All my other colleagues in the Global South that have been to the COPs, you can see how Eurocentric or global North-centric those spaces are. And I think much of that is related to access of information. So it is funny, you see these huge reunions, these huge meetings where young people from the North are taking the lead of the conversation for people that are living the consequences of the climate crisis in the Global South. And much of this has to do with access of information, access to language, and you see how young indigenous leaders, young people of color, young people from small island development states, they are absent of the conversation, and much of it has to do with access to information and the capacity to translate that information into advocacy at the global level. And coming to a space where Wikimedians that are here, I believe that it's really important to understand and to ask ourselves, how are we involving young people in particular from the Global South in this conversation? Because the way that we approach the situation is different where we're standing. And surely if you go and you talk to some young people in Europe or in North America, you have a different conversation to people that are living directly the crisis in the Global South. And how can we, and I think that's because we need to understand that we need to do an extra effort. And I think what we need to all agree on is to do that extra effort to make sure that that information is accessible, or to even involve them in trying to understand how to use that information to do advocacy. And I think that's what we have done in Air Pollution. In some areas of the country, or in some countries in Latin America, such as Chile or Mexico, the information is there. So it's not a problem of access to information, but how can we make information more usable to young people? So if we have a lot of data around air pollution, and we have a lot of satellite data from NASA saying how are the pollutants, PM10, PM2.5, yeah, but how can we make sure that people understand that? And in particular, young people. So how can we transform that information to say, well, maybe we can show it in another way? And I put you one example to wrap this up. So we were in a contingency of air pollution in Colombia, and everyone started to release data saying, oh, PM levels are currently like this. This is like one of the worst air pollution contingencies in Bogota. And nobody understood. And in particular, we felt like young people didn't understand the severities of the crisis. So what we did with a group of other climate activists was create 2 pairs of giant lungs made with cotton, and we put it on the central station of the public transport of Bogota, and we left them there. The cotton became dark with the pollution, and then people started to open a conversation in social media saying, oh, so that's how our lungs look like now that it's all polluted. And we were like, yes. And you know what? That's because PM levels are at this level. So we matched the information, but we made it accessible to other people in other ways. So how can we use digital platforms, TikTok, whatever, to make sure young people understand in other ways? And I believe art and symbols play a huge role in that, the information that is already there, but in a more youthful, accessible way.
That's like such a wonderful kind of summary of the nature of this conversation. I think like something where a dialogue we're constantly having in the movement is like, are we in the right languages? Are we showing the information in a format that helps? Is it locally contextualized? Is it persuasive? And something I've learned too is like Wikipedians tend to be obsessive documenters. It's like all the science, but the obsessive documentation may not be the narrative that folks need. And that's something I want to practice more with our movement. So we're coming to the kind of end of our panel, and I'm wondering if any of the panelists had like short last comments they wanted to add to reflect on what's happened here. Well, if there's not a last comment, I'm going to move on to our next part. So we're going to take a brief video, like 1.5 minute video play to give our translators a moment to breathe. And then we'll have a message from our executive director. So let me play the video.
Everyone in this world is entitled to enjoy human rights. These rights are protected by international and national instruments like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Did you know that there is a right to a healthy environment? With environmental problems like climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. To protect your rights, you need to know your rights. We all have a responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to neutral, fact-based, and current information around our shared right to a healthy environment. Wikipedia is where the world turns when they have questions. On Wikipedia, everyone can learn in their own language about their human rights and how we can protect the environment for future generations. Join the Wiki for Human Rights campaign from April 15th to May 15th to learn how to help. You can contribute. Visit Wiki for Human Rights on Meta for more information.
And I will now play a video from one of the editathons that our community ran a year or two ago.
I wanted to participate in this to learn how someone becomes a Wikipedia editor.
An editathon is when a group of people come together to edit Wikipedia on a specific topic. This is the first time an editathon has actually been held on climate change focused on Africa.
Topics related to Africa are very poorly covered, and this creates a knowledge gap.
With this event, we're bringing together African scholars to build a community of African editors focused on climate change.
I have entered edits into the page of climate change adaptation, which was really scanty when looking at it.
I've been able to edit pages around climate change and agriculture, specifically on Africa.
There are very many advantages of having a dedicated event. You concentrate more on learning.
Having Wikimedia, it's also easier to ask questions.
The impact of Wikipedia is significant. It's accessible in over 300 languages.
Nous devons aussi, en tant que chercheurs, mettre des informations en français.
I thought it was a very good opportunity to let my research be known.
My eyes have been opened to, if I want the good information there, I can help put it there.
Coming together with other researchers has been exciting because you're able to read together and write together, as well as bouncing ideas off of each other.
It has been a very nice experience, and I hope that connection would continue.
As a woman, my participation will be important to put the word out there that gender, yes, women can participate in sharing information.
So I think other researchers broadly should also come in and edit and see what they can add to Wikipedia.
So that was an event that ran about 2.5 years ago that kicked off much of our Global South editing on the topic. I'm now going to share a thank you message from Mariana Iskandar, our executive director. She was unable to attend today, but she was very excited to hear about our panel, so she wanted to send a message.
I'm so happy to have been invited to join you today. My name is Mariana Iskandar. I am the CEO of the Wikimedia Foundation. The Wikimedia movement, from Wikipedia to other free knowledge projects, is built on the belief that access to free and accurate information is a right for all. We know that billions of people rely on Wikipedia to understand the events that shape the world around us. This includes urgent environmental issues that you work on, like the planetary crisis, biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. I wanted to offer my thanks to our partners at the United Nations Environment Program and the United Nations Human Rights Office, not only for your support of this event, but for your partnership to expand the right of knowledge for all. A special thanks to those of you who have come together to exchange perspectives and to support this campaign. This includes Dr. Marcus Orania, Elizabeth Mremra, Tina Rai, and Alejandro Dali. A special thanks to the translators and community organizers for their efforts in making this a truly global, multilingual event that is accessible and inclusive. I want to offer a genuine word of appreciation to volunteers everywhere who are committed to increasing awareness of planetary crisis, biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. We know that knowledge can power action, and with action can come change. Thank you to Wikimedians who are involved in today's webinar or who are watching, for organizing events in your communities and for sharing your knowledge with the world. I'm amazed by the global breadth of what you are doing, including events happening in South Sudan, Kenya, Colombia, and many other places. As you've heard, today's event kicks off a month-long campaign to encourage many kinds of contributions on our Wikimedia projects. I'm really excited to see what we can all do together. Thanks.
I'm really grateful that we've been able to get to the attention from all parts of the movement on this, and I'm really grateful for Mariana and everyone who's been kind of thinking and acting and communicating and supporting us in this. And I really wanted to give like some special space to someone who's done wonderful, amazing work in preparing for this campaign. Ruby DeBenchi Brown is our senior organizing fellow for this campaign, and like our community's participation would not be possible without what she's done this year. And it's been a learning journey for both of us as we kind of make iterations on the campaign. And so I wanted to give her some space to kind of reflect on her experience, but also what you can do if you're watching this.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm really grateful to be here, and thanks to all our panelists for sharing such insightful information with us. My name is Ruby DeBenchi Brown from Ghana, and I joined the Wikimedia movement 4 years ago through Open Foundation West Africa, which is also an affiliate of the Wikimedia Foundation. I joined as a volunteer, and later on got the opportunity to be part of the team where I started organizing campaigns and projects around the Wikimedia movement, both in Ghana and in the Africa region. Next slide, please. So what have I learned, and why does this really matters to me? I must say, first of all, that I'm truly elated to be organizing a global campaign like Wiki for Human Rights this year. And one of the reasons why this campaign means a lot to me is the fact that when we talk about the topic human right, it cuts across all aspects. Human rights about our environment cuts across all aspects of our life, and it doesn't matter what your field of interest is, it concerns every one of us. And this campaign in particular has really been a learning curve for me, and it's really enlightened me. It's shaped my perception, my thought, especially as someone who is passionate about women empowerment stuff. And I must say that prior to this campaign, I hadn't really paid much attention to environmental topics like climate change. I always thought that it was inapt to my field of interest, but now I know why it really matters to women too. Next slide. So, sorry. So let me show you an example, the reason why I think I've come to know that this issue really matters to women. For instance, when you come to my region, which is Africa, whenever there's drought or the scarcity of water, a lot of women tend to suffer a lot. You see many women traveling miles to fetch water for their homes because women are seen as people, the ones who actually take care of their homes, because they need water to cook, they need water to wash their clothes, they need water to bath their kids, and water to clean their homes. And basically all these roles are performed by women, and they need water to be able to keep up with their responsibility. And if they have to travel miles to get water, it tends to impact their work because productive time is lost. Eventually, their health is also impacted. And I've come to see that there are enormous examples, and we can go on and on and on. And I'm so glad that through this campaign, I have been exposed to publications, videos, pictures that about our environment that are so powerful and so significant, and they have really improved my understanding about these issues and how they connect to the things that really matters to me. And this really tells us, or tell all of us, that knowledge in all forms about the environment is so powerful and significant in shaping our thoughts. It helps us to shape our actions, because when we get to know, it impacts the way that we react to things. And why it's very important for us to pay attention to these topics, especially now that our environment is experiencing a lot of crisis. And the beautiful thing is that we can start our journey by telling stories about how climate change or environmental issues are affecting our everyday lives and the very things that we care about. Because if they are connected to us, we'll be able to tell it better. And I must say that as a campaign organizer, I've come to also understand that these topics are even much easier to contribute. So it's easy to show a newcomer how to contribute to these topics, because not all these topics require you to start an article from scratch, like biographies, where it's very difficult to write about, especially if you're a newcomer. But if you're an experienced editor, it's very easy. And we have a call to action to improve the existing narrative and access to knowledge about our right to a healthy environment in diverse forms, like videos, text, audios, are very significant, especially in the language that we can understand. And the good news is that we already have a very good platform to do that. And the platform is Wikipedia, which we are talking about today. And next slide, please. And that is why we're partnering with local groups, organizations. And one example is the YCC, where we organized a workshop, because these are youth that are climate activists and they are concerned about, they are passionate about the climate, to build their capacity to be able to tell their story, the things that really matters to them about the environment, on Wikipedia. And next slide. And by putting this call to action, we have seen great response from our communities all around the world. And it's very exciting to see people already started to organize their campaigns, working hard, and people have already launched their campaigns already, and others are yet to happen. Next slide. So with this, we reached out to local affiliates, individual organizers in the regional level. And we think that it has been a great success, as we had a lot of people showing up and learning about the topic and the way that they can also be part of the campaign and contribute. And we've seen an example just this week with the Kenya community, where we had the UN experts also participating. And we have about 30 event plus that are going to be happening as part of this campaign. And there are about 10 events, series of events that are going to be happening in Spanish. So if you're a Spanish speaker, there's a lot of opportunities to be part of any of this event. And we want to highlight all these events and for you to be part of. Next slide. So some of the events that have already happened, like I mentioned earlier, this was the Kenya community. And in Kenya, they had a very wonderful panel of experts coming on board to share insights about the topic. And the good thing about it is that after the event, the Kenya communities identified a lot of gaps from the Kenya perspective around the topic and issues. And it's something that we're going to be editing on these topics throughout the month. And if you want to learn more, they hosted a YouTube event, so you can also watch the event on YouTube. Then next slide. we were also excited to see events from our new communities like the Wikimedia South Sudan. So this event actually launched a new community in South Sudan with support from their neighboring community, which is Uganda. And it was very exciting to see all these newcomers show up to start thinking about these topics of impact and how they can contribute to them. Next slide. We also witnessed a number of events in Nigeria, several events happening in different parts of Nigeria. It was so exciting how the Nigerian community really embraced the campaign this year. And we felt that it was really a success in Nigeria. Next event. And so this is just the beginning. There are several other events that are going to unfold in Europe, in Latin America, in Haiti, in Africa. There's a lot to be part of. And so look out for our campaign meta page for all the campaign activities that are going to be unfold, and be part of any of the events in your community. Next slide. So we are not done here. You still have opportunity to join other upcoming events that we're going to be hosting. Next slide. And one of such events is the writing context. And so this writing context is inviting all Wikimedians to come together to contribute to the topic area. And so from 15th, which is tomorrow, to that's 15th April to 15th May, the writing context will be hosted. And this is just a 1-month writing context. So if you're interested, kindly add your username on the campaign, Wiki for Human Rights campaign meta page. And that is the link you see on your screen, and be part of the event. There are going to be awards for participants that contribute to the campaign. There's also going to be an Earth Day workshop, and this Earth Day workshop seeks to enhance your skill in Wikipedia editing. So if you want to know how to edit Wikipedia, or you want to see how it's done, or you want to improve your skills, your editing skills around this topic area, you can be part of this event. So to be part of this event, just register using the Zoom link as you see on your screen. Next slide. There's also a human rights group. There's also a human rights interest group that has been launched. And so this human rights interest group is calling on all Wikimedians, individuals, affiliate organizations that are interested about human rights perspective of Wikimedia projects to be part. So if you're a Wikimedian, you're an affiliate, you're an individual Wikimedian, this is an opportunity, and you're really concerned about human rights aspect of the campaigns and projects that we organize in the Wikimedia movement. I think this is a very great opportunity to be involved, to contribute to it, to ensure that our human right is well implemented in the movement. And I think Alex can share the link with you if you want to read more about it. So that brings me to the end of my speech, or my interaction with you. I'm so grateful, and thank you so much. I will hand over to Alex to take it from here.
Thanks so much. And Ruby, like, this campaign would not run without you. And I think your experience has been really, really great. And Ben in the chat is fixing links. So I placed them poorly in the chat, and he's going to be fixing that. Thank you so much for our speakers, our translators. An hour-and-a-half event is a big effort for translation. I really appreciate it. It's a wonderful thing, and it's so special to have the attention from various parts of the Wikimedia movement. and from our partners at UN, the Office of Human Rights, the UN Environmental Program, the Biodiversity Secretariat, and UNICEF, and others have been really helpful in making this work. So thank you all. And that is the end of our presentation. And I hope we see you in the wikis, in the wiki community, tweeting about the campaign, sharing it, talking to your movements about it. This is what matters. Wikimedia is a platform for everyone in every language, in every context. And we really want to make human rights and environmental crises part of that conversation. Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.